Do you have any handle on that, just in that area at all, or connections?
No, unfortunately. Okay. It's sort of cloth. 1 second. Oh, it's the end. Okay, the other one is in.
Okay, no, it's finishing up, that's all, I'm good, so I need to put out the next one.
Got to get a cloth. Huh?
How was the class last night?
Very nice. Yeah.
Yeah, good showing?
A few people, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so we're in the middle of chapter 23. This is, I know Jay likes knowing the number lesson. I think it's 39. I think it's lesson 39. I believe we're on page 314. And we're in the middle of talking about, well, I shouldn't say we're in the middle. We pretty much spoke about what happens when a person does a mitzvah, right? That when a person does a mitzvah, he becomes like the limbs of the king, right? And until he becomes one with the king. Okay, so we want to now move over. For the rest of the chapter, we're going to be talking about Torah, the study of Torah. If a mitzvah unites us, makes us one with Hashem, so what does Torah study add? We actually spoke about this to some extent last night, this concept. What is, when we say to bring God down, to bring godliness down into this world, what does that mean? God wasn't here already. God isn't everywhere. And what does it mean to bring him down? So there's a story. There was a chassid from Odessa, two chassidim from Odessa that came to visit the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the first one went in for a private audience, a yechidus, that's what it's called. And the Rebbe asked him, what's going on in Odessa? Are there Torah classes? How are the people? And this person was, Baruch Hashem, people are getting, there's a lot of camaraderie. He was going on and on about the greatness of the city and how much good there is. And the Rebbe took out a 10 ruble and gave it to the chassid to take home. The next chassid comes in also from Odessa, and the Rebbe also asks him, how's it going in Odessa? And he decides he's going to tell the Rebbe the truth. That in Odessa there's disagreements and there's politics and it's not all roses as the first chassid made it sound. The Rebbe thanked him and gave him 1 ruble. So he turns to the Rebbe and says, I don't understand. The other chassid told you a puff piece about Odessa and you gave him 10 ruble, and I told you the truth. So the Rebbe told him there are 2 Odessas. There's the Odessa up there and Odessa down here. And I wanted to know in which Odessa you live. In other words, there's every situation you're in, there could be 2 realities of that situation, 2 ways of viewing that situation. And it was the most amazing class in the world. The other person could leave and say, I almost fell asleep for 45 minutes or an hour, right? They were both in the same place. They were both experiencing the same thing, and yet they had 2 different perspectives. There's the top-down perspective and the bottom-up perspective. So when it comes to the world, we discussed in chapter 21 that there's a difference between the way God sees the world, the reality of the world from God's perspective and from our perspective, right? Like if you put on glasses, you see a different reality. We said there the example of speech, right? When a person speaks, so the person who's speaking the words feel like they're part of him. The person who hears the words, though, once the words come out of the speaker's mouth, those words are separated, and now the person can receive the words in any way that you can't control anymore how they receive it. So there's the speaker and there's the listener. If I want to share with you how I feel, I could say those words. Not necessarily will the feeling come across, right? So it's possible for a person to say something, let's say a metaphor, and in the metaphor, he's trying to convey an idea. And the person listening only hears the metaphor and doesn't hear the idea. So there's two different perspectives of this metaphor. The speaker's perspective is the idea. He doesn't care about the metaphor. He's concerned and he cares about the idea he's trying to convey through the metaphor. The listener, all he hears is the metaphor. This difference exists in our world. That when God has a perspective of this world, that the world is a byproduct of his speech, and therefore the world is really nothing. It's just part of his speech. It has no independent existence. However, we are from the perspective of the world. We are from the perspective of the listener. And what we hear are words. We see a world. We don't see God in the world. So the question is, which glasses do we wear? Now, it seems obvious that because we're creations, we wear the glasses of creations. And naturally speaking, go out into the world, speak to someone who's never studied Torah. What do they see? What glasses does the average person wear? They wear the glasses of a creation. They see the world is obvious. Even if they do believe in God, it's sort of an addition to the obvious. The obvious is the world. Comes the Torah and teaches us that we are capable of wearing God's glasses. Although naturally speaking, we don't have God's glasses. We have natural glasses. We're capable of wearing God's glasses. How do we do this? Through studying Torah. Because when you do a mitzvah, as we discussed in the first half of the chapter, you become a chariot to God, a limb to God. But you're still separate. You're totally selfless. You totally have no independent will or identity, but you're a chariot. What happens when you unhook the chariot from the horses? You've got a museum piece or scrap, right? Wood or metal. But it's not a chariot anymore. I mean, it is a chariot. It's a potential chariot, but right now it's just a lump of matter. So by doing a mitzvah, you become a chariot to God, but you're still a creation. You're still separate. We learned in chapter 5 in Tanya that when you study Torah, unlike a mitzvah that's like a garment, it's something additional to you, although it makes you, right? You can tell about a person by the clothing there, so it does fit you and it does express you, but it's still separate. You can choose to take it off and put on something else. When you study Torah, because the Torah goes into your mind and stays there forever, you can't forget it. You can forget, but when you hear it again, I remember it. In other words, it always stays there. And while you're studying it and engrossed in it, the Torah surrounds your mind too. It's hard to focus on something else. So the Torah surrounds you and you surround it. That's a unity. That's a union. That's an intimacy that doesn't exist with mitzvahs. When you study Torah, you start seeing things from the lens of Torah. Let's take practical. Let's get a little practical. Not practical. Something that we're familiar with. Okay, so look at food, look at sleep, look at your body. Whatever it is you want to look at in this material world. If you look at it not through the glasses of Torah, look at it through human glasses, what do you see? You see an opportunity to enjoy yourself. Most people, when they see food, they see an opportunity to enjoy themselves. They can't necessarily enjoy themselves every meal, so they survive, and then they look forward to once a week where they get a good meal. Sleep, the same thing, taking care of your body, whatever it is you do, it's all about what's good for me and what do I want. Then you study Torah, and for 99.9% of your life, the Torah says what's good for you. And it doesn't always match up to what you think is good for you. So the Torah says on a regular day, you have to eat, even if you're not in the mood, because you have to be healthy. Then the Torah says that there's a couple times a year where you're not allowed to eat, even if you're hungry. The Torah says there's a way to get dressed. To put on your clothes, you start from the right side, the left side, top, down. There's a way, there's an order, there's a system how to do it. It's inconvenient, doesn't matter. This is God's will. This is the will of the Creator. In other words, until you learn Torah, you see things from the human glasses. What does a human see? A human sees itself. A creation sees itself and what's good for it. When you study Torah, now you stop seeing things through those glasses. Now, obviously, if you study Torah once a year, you're going to still see things. But if you study Torah every day and you start trying to live a Torah life, you sooner or later stop seeing things in that light. It doesn't matter anymore that I like a cheeseburger. It doesn't matter anymore. It's not even tempting, because now I have I'm wearing the Torah glasses. I'm wearing God's glasses. So this is in a very external, studying the revealed Torah, the Talmud, the Code of Jewish Law, the Tanakh. When you study the Torah, this is the perspective that changes. That when you look at the world, you stop seeing the world from a selfish perspective, from a human perspective. You start seeing it from a Torah perspective. But then there's also a fundamental change that happens besides just seeing a practical change of, how do I deal with the world? Do I deal with it in a way that makes me feel good and fulfilled, or that makes God's desire fulfilled? As we discussed before, human glasses, the world is obvious, and God has to be taught. So what happens when there's an argument, a seeming contradiction between, let's say, science and Torah? So what happens? Who needs to defend themselves? Torah. Because for the human, science is obvious. The Torah says something that seemingly contradicts science. Torah's got to have to justify that, because science is fact. That's the world we live in. Someone who learns Torah and sees from the Torah's perspective and realizes and recognizes the world from a top down, that the world is just a byproduct from God's speech. So now God is obvious and the world needs to be explained. If you notice the language, the last couple chapters of Tanya, we're trying to prove that the world exists, because really it shouldn't exist, right? Really, it's just part of God's speech. So really, it has no independent existence. So we're proving the Alter Rebbe doesn't prove God exists. So far in Tanya, we did in the second section of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe discusses at length how can we prove logically that God created the world and God continues to engage with the world and recreate it every moment. But so far in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe hasn't even tried to prove God's existence. A soul's existence. The Alter Rebbe takes for granted that the soul exists, that God exists. The question is, now how do we deal with the body? How does the world get in the way? How do we deal with that? So from a Torah, when you study, and this is more when you study Hasidus and the inner dimension of Torah, so then, again, your glasses change. You're wearing godly glasses, divine glasses, and now the God is obvious and the world needs to be justified and explained. Let's see this inside in Alter Rebbe's words. So on page 314, this is the 22nd of Shvat in a leap year for those who are following along with a different Tanya. Now, since the divine will, which is in perfect unity with God himself, stands completely revealed in the divine soul and in its inner garments, in other words, its thought and speech, while a person occupies himself with words of Torah, and there is nothing obscuring the divine will at that time. In other words, when a person is learning Torah, it's not like a garment, it's not something additional. There's no separation between the person and God and the Torah. It's an intimacy. For when one studies Torah, the divine will and wisdom contained in it come into full expression in one's soul and its faculties of thought and speech.
It's like a total immersion.
Yeah. And it's an immersion in both ways. Usually when you immerse yourself, the thing you immerse yourself in surrounds you. But you may still have some foreign objects inside of you. When you go to mikvah, when a person goes to mikvah, now we're talking about a biblical mikvah. So today a woman goes to mikvah, or for conversion you go to mikvah, or in biblical times if you went to mikvah to ritually purify yourself, not only is there not allowed to be something on the outside of your body separating between the mikvah waters and the body, there isn't allowed to be something inside your body separating. Now the water isn't going inside your mouth, but still, inside your mouth, you have to make sure there's no food stuck. That's why a woman, when she goes to the mikveh, during that day, she doesn't eat meat, because meat gets stuck between your teeth. And then, so the water of the mikveh is not going inside, but because the mikveh needs to be surrounding from all sides, so therefore, inside the potential for the water has to be there. But usually when you immerse yourself in something, the thing surrounds you. When you study something, not only are you immersed in it, it's immersed in you. It works both ways. So it follows that at that time, in other words, when you're studying Torah, the soul and these garments of thought and speech are also truly united with God, with a unity comparable to that of God's speech and thought with his essence and being, as explained above. So just like God's speech is one with him, when you study Torah and you're one with Torah, you become one with God, because you're one with God's speech, and God's speech is one with him. So now you're one with God. For nothing is separate from God, except insofar as his countenance is concealed. So it's only what's perceived. It seems that it's concealed, but really nothing is concealed. The Alter Rebbe, you can actually hear the Rebbe said the story. Alter Rebbe once was leaving his room, and he heard his wife speaking to a few women, and she repeated something from the Alter Rebbe, and she said, "Meiner sagt." In Yiddish, it means mine says. It was my husband, or mine, right? In Yiddish, in English, you wouldn't say that. You'd say my spouse, or my wife, or my husband, my says. The Alter Rebbe, it says, fell onto the doorposts of the door he was walking out of, and he fell into a sort of like a meditative state. And he said, if with one mitzvah I'm yours, then how true it is how we are Hashem's, because how many mitzvahs we do for Hashem. In other words, when the Alter Rebbe heard his wife say my, with what was he hers? Right away, the Alter Rebbe was wearing Torah glasses. So with what is he hers? Because of a mitzvah, right? There's a biblical obligation of a man to his wife, and therefore he's hers. Not because he promised her he's hers, or he committed, or they love each other. That's not what makes him hers. What makes him hers is that he has a mitzvah to perform to her. That's what makes him hers. So when you're wearing those glasses, and automatically what you see is a mitzvah. So if I'm yours with one mitzvah, with how many mitzvahs am I Hashem's? But so obviously we're not a Rebbe, but still that's the perspective that Alter Rebbe wants us to change when you study Torah. So your glasses change. You see things differently because you're in a state of union with Hashem, of unity and with Hashem. So this is going to get us a little mystical in the next section. So I'll give a brief introduction before we get into the nitty-gritty, and how much of it we'll actually understand, whatever. Later on in Tanya, he's going to explain these things at greater length. Okay, so if Torah causes us to wear godly glasses, so I can understand that human beings in this world need to study Torah, because if we want to wear godly glasses, we have to study Torah to put on those glasses. What about angels or souls in heaven, either before they come down or after they depart? Do they also have to study Torah? It would seem they don't. Why? Because for angels, God's obvious. For souls, God's obvious. So why would they need to study Torah? You need Torah where it's dark. It's like the guy who searched. I just met the guy who searched for his lost object by the light. I just told you this story, no? This guy, he's looking for his watch by a street lamp outside. So someone else comes and helps him look, and they're looking for a half hour and they can't find it. Finally, he turns to the guy and he says, "Where's the last place you remember seeing it?" So he said, "I dropped it like down the block." So he says, "So why are you looking here?" He says, "Because there's light here," right? So there's light. You need light where it's dark. Where it's not dark, you don't need light, right? So you would think that the Torah is only necessary here. And yet we find many stories in the Torah, in the Talmud and the Medrash, that tell us that they do study Torah in heaven, that the souls and the angels study Torah. A few classic examples. What happened before when Moses went up to the mountain to receive the Torah? You know the conversation he had? So the angels complained. They said, they told God, "Why are you giving the Torah to human beings? It belongs here. This is its place." So God turns to Moses and says, "No, defend yourself. You want the Torah, defend yourself." So Moses said, "Do you have an evil inclination? Did you go to Egypt?" In other words, everything it says in the Torah doesn't apply to you. Okay? The Torah isn't yours, it's ours. But what does that tell us? It tells us that the angels appreciated Torah, understood Torah, and wanted to keep it for themselves. Okay, so the concept of Torah does exist above this world. Then there's the famous story in the Talmud where there's an argument between Rabbi Elazar and the sages about a certain halachic dilemma. And usually the halacha followed Rabbi Eliezer, and in this case, the majority of rabbis disagreed with him. What happens when a majority disagrees with you? You follow the majority. So he wanted to prove that he's right. So he said, "Let heaven prove that I'm right." He performed a whole bunch of miracles. The wall started caving in and many miracles happened. Then he said, "Let heaven prove that I'm right." And a voice came out of heaven and said, "Rabbi Elazar is right. Allah is like him." So Rabbi Yeshua got up and said, "Torah lo bashamayim." The Torah is not in the heaven, and the Torah says you follow the majority. And they ruled in the court the halacha not like Rabbi Elazar. Later, one of the sages met Elijah the prophet, and he asked him what happened in heaven when Rabbi Yeshua challenged the heavenly voice. And Elijah the prophet said, God sat back, smiled, and said, my children have defeated me, literally defeated me. In other words, Torah is studied in heaven. Perhaps its final say is down here, but it's still studied in heaven. And we know other places where there were disagreements and arguments in heaven, and they said we need to find out what the law is down here, what the rabbis would say to it. Soon I'll share with you, after we learn inside, I'll share with you a story that's a Tzedek that brings this out. But the point is that Torah is in heaven. So what do you need Torah if the purpose of Torah is to teach us how to relate to this world? What is in the beginning God created heaven and earth, and be fruitful and multiply, where tzitzis, where tefillin? What does all that have to do in heaven? You can't even do those things in heaven. What does all that have to do in heaven? So the Rebbe is going to explain, and that there are two, and we briefly mentioned this in the past. Again, later on in Tanya is going to explain this at great length. The way God relates to the world, there are two modes. One is called he fills the world, and one is called he surrounds the world. In Hebrew, in Aramaic, but in the Hebrew, it's called mimalei kol almin, he fills the world, and sovev kol almin, he surrounds the world. In short, we call it memale and sovev. What's the difference between filling something and surrounding it? Filling something means that you invest yourself in it. When you fill something, usually that means that there's boundaries and limitations of the thing you're filling, right? Even if you're filling an Olympic-sized swimming pool, there's still a size to it. Otherwise, you wouldn't call it filling it, right? Even the oceans, we say they're overflowing. What does that mean? There's a certain limit that we want it to be at, or we expect it to be at, and when it rises above that, we consider that overflowing. Yeah, but if you had a bird's eye view of history, you might say it's not overflowing because really it could be much higher, or really it started off much lower and really it's already overflowing. This is just collateral damage thousands of years later, right? There's no way to really know that. But when you say filling something, no matter how big it is, you're saying there's something here that has a parameter and you fill it. So whatever is going inside is being limited by the thing that's being filled.
The physical dimensions is what basically you're saying. Right?
Yeah, physical dimensions, the color of it, even the smell of it, right? It goes into a dirty, you fill water into a dirty vessel, the water is going to get dirty. Fill clean water, put dirty water into a filter, it's going to filter it. Whatever you do, it's going to adapt to the surrounding. When you say, I want to surround something, then not necessarily is the thing that you're surrounding going to have any type of connection to the thing that's being surrounded. The classic example of this is the difference between food and clothing, right? Food needs to be edible, needs to be something that your body can handle. Clothing, I could wear someone else's clothing. Now, with clothing, at the end of the day, I need to wear something that's somewhat suitable to me. What about a house? I could live in a house myself as 5'9". Someone 6'5" can come in and live there. I could live there with 8 people. Someone with 20 people can come and live there. A house, although because it surrounds me, just like clothing surrounds me, so it doesn't necessarily have to conform with me. Whereas me living in the house, I have to conform with the house, right? If the house has a hole in the roof and I'm living inside of it, I have to dress warmer because I'm inside the house. The house surrounding me, it doesn't care about what's inside of it. Right? So when we talk about God interacting with this world, and we say God is thinks about us and cares about us and is invested. This is all like a ray of God's light. God himself is much higher than having to do with the world. Right? So there's an element of godliness that invests itself in the world. Memale kol almin. This is the 10 utterances, God's speech that God speaks, right? This is, God said it should be light. He didn't say it should be dark, it should be light, right? So that's very limited and conforms with the world. That's the light that invests itself in the world. Then there is the light of Sovev Kol Almin, and it surrounds the whole world, not just the physical world, it surrounds all of existence. In other words, the light of Sovev is sort of the will that wants a world, and the world exists within it. Now, God wanted the physical world, but in order to get here, he created many, many spiritual worlds. Those spiritual worlds contain all the angels and souls and everything else, but it's all created, it's all part of the world that's inside the light of Sovev. Okay? So if we wear the glasses of physical creations, we don't see godliness. An angel sees godliness. It has godly glasses, but it only has the godly glasses of Mimale Kol Almin, of the level of godliness that invests itself in the world. That's the level it sees and interacts with. It also doesn't have the perception of Sovev Kol Almin, because Sovev by definition means it's beyond you. It surrounds you. That's the definition of it. Now, again, it doesn't mean literally it's around. It could be right here at this time, but it means it's above. It doesn't get involved, and therefore I don't necessarily see it. When I think about this mug and realize that God created it, which part of God am I recognizing? I'm recognizing Mimale Kol Almin because that's the part of God that created this. I'm not seeing Sovev Kol Almin because that had nothing to do with this specific creation. So I don't see it. Now, if I study Hasidus and Kabbalah, then I could start thinking about Sovev Kol Almin. In other words, even the angels, if they want to have a glimpse outside of their existence to the light of Sovev Kol Almin, they also need to study Torah. Because what's Torah? Torah is the blueprint. In other words, Torah is the will of God that precedes the worlds, that comes before the world is created. It's part of Sovev Kol Almin. So even though angels, compared to us, wear divine glasses, compared to Sovev, they're also wearing creation glasses. They're also wearing worldly glasses. And in order for them to have the perception of God, they also need to put on Torah glasses. And they also need to study Torah. Yeah.
So when you're talking about your mug, if you're concentrating, say, okay, you're drinking the coffee, you're concentrating on the coffee. The coffee is the mimale. But the mug itself, surrounding it, is the Sovev.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about the coffee. I'm not really thinking about the mug.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the mug is a tool for me to drink it. So I have to think about it too. I'm not thinking about the person who made the mug. I don't think I ever thought about the person who made this mug. I see the name of this company every single time I take a sip, and I can't tell you the last time I actually noticed the name. Now I'm looking at it to give you a metaphor. I can't tell you the last time I actually noticed that name was there, right? Because it surrounds it. It isn't necessary for the specifics of the cup of coffee. I know the cover of the pod or the label and the coffee that I make it more than I know the name sitting right here on my face every time I take a sip, right? So
It's all perspective.
It's all, exactly. Now, even when it comes to mitzvahs also, so when a person learns Torah, he becomes one with Hashem. Now, mitzvahs also does accomplish something here more than up there, just like Torah is here more than up there, although it's up there too. Mitzvahs also, that's why it says in Ethics of the Fathers that 1 hour of tshuva and good deeds in this world is better than the entire world to come, right? Also, you'll know when you go to a cemetery, we tuck our tzitzis in. We don't display our tzitzis, not to embarrass the dead, that they can't, we could do a mitzvah and they can't. So in other words, there's a connection we can have with God, because ultimately this is the ultimate purpose of creation. So we're more the purpose, and that's why we can connect more to the beginning. But the upper worlds also need to learn Torah if they want to appreciate not the mamalei that's in them, but the sovev, the will of God that supersedes them. King David refers to Torah as in chapter 119, he says, Zmiros hayuli chukecha. Your chukim, your mitzvot, in other words, your Torah, King David says to God, were like songs to me. They're songs. And the Talmud says he was punished for that. Why? Studying Torah, doing mitzvahs, doesn't that bring us blessing? Isn't that like song, right? Doesn't it bring us peace? It does. But because it's much more than that, King David was expected to realize that. And because he limited it, so to speak, to songs. But at the end of the day, studying Torah has something in it that no other mitzvah has. And that's why Torah comes not only before the things we need to do, Torah comes before mitzvahs. If there's an option, if you're in the middle of studying Torah and there's a mitzvah that needs to be done, you study Torah. You don't stop to do the mitzvah unless the mitzvah can't be done by someone else. Even prayer. It says Torah supersedes prayer. It says Shimon Bar Yochai, he would pray, I think, or Rabbi Yehuda Anasi would pray once in 30 days. Now, today, we do stop Torah study for mitzvah and for prayer, but not because prayer and mitzvah is more important than Torah study, but just because Torah study isn't our life, and we stop Torah study for many other things, we stop it for prayer and mitzvahs also. But if there was someone today that is literally his entire life was Torah, that is the most important thing, and he wouldn't stop for anything else. Nothing.
What they say there about Mashiach, if Mashiach would come today in the middle of studying Torah, finish that piece, and then went on to see.
So if you study Torah to that extent today, you would do that. If not, that would be a chutzpah to make Mashiach wait. Right? Your coffee can't wait, and the pizza can't wait, and Mashiach could wait. It's a little disrespectful. But someone who does study Torah 24/7, yeah. Okay. So this is and now the Alter Rebbe is going to explain this greatness of Torah over mitzvahs and why, therefore, it's necessary, what it accomplishes within the person, and why it's necessary even in the upper worlds. Page 315. Moreover, so till now we discussed the unity that's created when a person studies Torah between his mind, between his soul and thought and speech, and God's speech, which is one with God himself. Moreover, their unity. In other words, the unity of the divine soul and its faculties with God that is attained through Torah study is even more exalted and more powerful than the unity of God's infinite light with the upper spiritual worlds. 4. The divine will is actually manifest in the soul and its garments that are engaged in Torah study, since it is identical with the Torah being studied. Yeah? So in other words, the Torah was written for our world. What does it say in the Torah? It says in the Torah, don't steal. Only we're capable of stealing. Souls and angels aren't. So there you have to explain stealing in a more spiritual light. But who becomes one with Torah in a practical way? Us. Therefore, we have the greatest unity with Torah. Another thing, all the supernal worlds receive their vitality by way of the light and life derived from the Torah, which is God's will and wisdom. As it is written, you have made them all with wisdom. Yeah, you created all the worlds with wisdom, and the Torah is God's wisdom. So in other words, the Torah is the source of creation. And remember, the creator has to continue creating the creation constantly if it's something from nothing. So the Torah is constantly creating everything that exists. So that means the Torah is creating you. He's also creating the food you just ate and the drink you just drank and your car and your job and your paycheck and your home. Everything is being recreated by Torah. Thus, it follows that God's wisdom, in other words, the Torah transcends them all. So the Torah doesn't just transcend us, it transcends all of creation, all of the worlds, even the spiritual worlds. In fact, the Torah, God's will, is described as encompassing all the worlds. Yeah, in the Hebrew, you see sovev kol almin on the second line, meaning that it is at a level that cannot become clothed within the worlds, because then it would be limited to the worlds, and the worlds don't have the power to limit that level, but rather animates and illuminates them as if from a distance, from above, in a transcending and encompassing manner. It's almost like, and I don't know the exact terms for this, you may be more familiar, but it's almost like having an electrical, powering your house from an electrical grid. You know what would happen if you plug your house into an electrical grid, into the substation or whatever? You'd blow up your house, right? So imagine Sovev Kol Almin getting into the world and animating my coffee. I wouldn't see coffee. There would be no existence. It would all just explode. It has to be come down through ishtalshalut, through compressions and through tzimtzumim. That's Memalei Kol Almin, that finally a little bit of electricity comes into my house, powers the lights and the refrigerator. So Sovev Kol Almin animates and illuminates the world in a transcending and encompassing manner. It is the substation. And ultimately, it all comes from there, but it's outside the city. It surrounds the city. It's not in the city. If it was in the city, it would be a hazard. It would be dangerous. And it is this level which transcends all the worlds that is clothed in a truly revealed form in one's soul and his soul garments when he studies Torah. So when you do a mitzvah, what are you in touch with? Mimalei Kol Almin, because then you're in touch with physical objects. In other words, you're in touch with them all. When you study Torah, you become one with Sovev Kol Almin, with the Chach, with God's wisdom, which is this level that created the worlds and transcends the worlds. You'll say you're sitting here in class, we're studying Torah, and you're not really feeling it. Right? Unless you are. It could be you are. But if you're not, you might be thinking. So he continues, the second paragraph on 316, even though he does not see it. In other words, when one studies Torah, he is unable to consciously experience the unity of his soul with God, which is attained thereby, yet his soul feels it. And who cares if his soul feels it? So what? If you don't feel it, how does that affect my life? In fact, this is precisely why he can endure such a unity with God, precisely because he cannot feel it. Unlike the supernal worlds, where godliness is not obscured as it is in this world, and they cannot therefore endure such a unity with God without becoming completely nullified and losing their identities entirely. In other words, if Sovev Kolal Min would become revealed to the angels, what would happen to them? They would fry to a pulp, right? How could we survive this unity with Sovev Kolal Min? Because we don't see it. We don't feel it. Because we don't feel it, we can handle it. Not because we're really capable of handling it more than angels, but because we're not in touch with it. We don't see that electricity. It's even... Think about the difference between an adult and a child looking at something that's, very hot. It just came out of an oven. You could still see it's glowing hot. You could see the steam coming from it. A child knows he doesn't touch fire. He doesn't know you don't touch something that came out of the oven. But the adult sees something there that the child doesn't see. The adult's eyes don't see it, but the adult sees it. And therefore the adult knows you don't put it on the counter, it'll burn the counter. You don't put it at the edge of the counter, someone might touch it and burn themselves. The child doesn't see that. So the same thing. We don't see the truth of Torah, so we're not scared to engage with it. We're not scared to be thinking people that are going to come in and see, does this make sense to me? Does it not make sense to me? If we saw God in the text, we wouldn't dare we wouldn't try to question what it says, and we wouldn't try to understand it, because what do you mean? This is what God's saying. So it allows us to engage with Torah. The fact that we can't see the truth, so to speak. Does that make sense? This discussion of the exalted unity with God attained through Torah study, which is even greater than that accomplished by performing the mitzvahs, explains why Torah study is so much loftier than all the other commandments, including even prayer, which affects unity within all the supernal worlds. Prayer, right? What do we say at the beginning of prayer? L'shem yichud kutsha brichu shchinte. What are we doing? We're combining and affecting the spiritual worlds. Things are happening because of our prayer. Torah study is even greater than prayer. So, right? Why? Because Torah study affects Sovev Kolal Min. What's Kudsha Brichu Shchinte? It's all levels within creation. That's all Mimalei Kolal Min. You study Torah, you're in touch with Sovev Kolal Min. And although the law requires of anyone whose Torah study is not his entire occupation that he interrupt his study for prayer, which would seem to indicate that prayer surpasses Torah study, that's not the case. This is so only because he would in any case pause and interrupt his studies for other things. So therefore he interrupts it for Torah study and for mitzvahs. But really, even for an average person, Torah study is greater than prayer, even if you don't see it and you don't feel it. And most people, when they study, when they pray, they feel a connection to God more than when they're studying. Because when you're studying, you have to understand it. It's not enough to know that that's what God said. You have to understand it. You have to move God out of it. That's why when it says you have to learn Torah for the sake of God, it says you have to think about it at the beginning of your Torah study. That's why we say the bracha at the beginning. Because you have to remember God at the beginning. But when you're studying, you have to be engaged with your own mind. Otherwise, you're not studying Torah. If you're just reading the words because it's God's words and you accept whatever it says, you're not studying Torah. So you're not doing the mitzvah of Torah study. And you're not really studying Torah because you're not surrounding it and it's not surrounding you. When I listen to a speech in a foreign language, there's no unity like the unity of study. But when you study something in the language you understand, now you become one with it. If you're just going to read the words of Torah and not understanding what it says, you're not one with it. So to become one with it, we have to neglect to see the truth. We can't see the truth if we want to become one with it. But that doesn't take away the fact that we actually do become one with it. I said I'd share a story before. The stories of the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, that he was once, they were building a shul in Lubavitch, and there was the groundbreaking. So by the groundbreaking ceremony, he asked the Hasidim if they'd like to hear a Hasidic discourse or a story. So they realized if the Rebbe is asking them, so they said a story. So the Tzemach Tzedek said like this, stories like this. There was a tzaddik, his name was the Ruzhiner, a famous Hasidic master, who lived not too long before the Tzemach Tzedek. And he had two Hasidim. And one of his Hasidim was in charge of the land, owned an estate, and he rented part of the estate to another Hasid to have a business there, an inn, whatever it was. Okay? And this business partnership went on for a long time. Then one winter, it's especially tough, and the Hasid didn't make enough money, and he doesn't have enough money to pay the rent. What happens? You don't pay the rent. You're evicted. Someone else could come and pay the rent. So this Chassid goes to the Rebbe, and he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't have enough money to pay. Maybe the Rebbe can influence his other Chassid to forgive him the loan. So the Rebbe calls him the other Chassid, and he asks him to, if he can do some tzedakah, some kindness. He says, sure. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, every time the Chassid goes to the Rebbe intervenes, and the other Chassid listens and forgives the loan. At a certain point, now it's starting to affect his bottom line. So at a certain point, he says, I can't do it anymore. The Rebbe asks him to forgive the loan. He says, I can't. And he evicts the Chassid. Okay. Eventually, this landlord passes away. He comes up to heaven, and there's a commotion in the heavenly court. What do we do with this Chassid? He didn't listen to his Rebbe. His Rebbe told him to forgive the loan to his fellow Chassid. He didn't listen. But then the angels came on the other side and said, what do you mean? You know how many times he did listen? You know how many times he forgave the loan? Doesn't that count for anything? And there was a debate in the heavenly court, what should be his judgment? So finally, someone spoke up and said, really the heavenly court can't adjudicate this case because we're dealing here with money. You guys don't appreciate at what point it becomes moot that there's a mitzvah to give tzedakah. If you don't have the money, then you don't have the money. We need to have rabbis that understand what money is adjudicate this case. So they called the Beis Yosef and the Bach. These are two commentaries. The Beis Yosef became the code of Jewish law, and to have a court that they should adjudicate the law. They started deliberating, and then finally, whoever raised the issue in the first place realized that even these rabbis, it's already 300 years since they passed, they also forgot the taste of money. We need a court that is presently alive, experiencing money to adjudicate this case. The Tzemach Tzedek finished the story, and the Tzemach Tzedek turns to the Chassidim and he says, I think that he's innocent. In other words, that he should go to heaven, that he did everything he needed to do. What do you guys think? The Hasidim realized that the Rebbe is performing a court now to save a soul. So all the Hasidim screamed out, Zakai, Zakai, he's innocent. In other words, Torah in its essence, Torah in its purest form, can only be experienced in this world. And that's why even though a soul after it passes will study Torah for eternity, the soul wants to stay here for another moment and study Torah here and do a mitzvah here. Because there is no greater unity than being united with God in this world through studying Torah and doing mitzvahs. By the way, I don't know if you remember, this whole conversation is here to teach us that if a person doesn't, not to help us, that if you don't have time to awaken a love and awe of Hashem to get you to do all the mitzvahs, these are the meditations that are going to help us. This is the quick dose, right? If you understand what a mitzvah is and what Torah study is, and you're sitting, you wake up in the morning and you want to study Torah, but there's a little voice inside that says maybe take a nap or go do something else. If you think about this and realize that one moment of Torah study in this world is greater than all the Torah study every angel can ever study and every soul can ever study in that, are you going to waste another minute? Are you going to give up the opportunity to do another mitzvah? Next chapter, chapter 24, we're going to learn the damage that's caused by a sin. Thinking about that, are you going to allow yourself to do a sin when this type of damage can be caused? Now, obviously, the perfect way of doing this would be to arouse a love of God and an awe of God, and all this should come naturally. But if a person is not in the mood of creating an awe, or he's not knowledgeable enough, or he's not in that meditative state, then the more you study these chapters, especially the fact that the world is nothing, right? The world is, and the only power we have is that we're able to unite with God. How do you unite with God? Through a mitzvah, through Torah study. All of this is going to bring us to that point where now, anytime you're faced with a challenge for doing a mitzvah or committing a sin, all you have to do is think about this for a minute, and it's not a challenge anymore. It's not a question anymore. And every mitzvah is the same as idolatry. Every sin is the same as idolatry, and every mitzvah is the same because it's all about, am I united with God or separated from God? Okay, let's finish here. Okay, so is it okay if I go a few minutes over? Yeah.
Yeah, we finish the chapter.
Just finish the chapter here because, yeah. We know that Torah it says in the Ethics of Our Fathers, if there's no fear, there's no wisdom, and if there's no wisdom, there's no fear. So which way is it? Does fear come first or wisdom come first? It says if there's no fear, there's no wisdom, so fear comes first. That is, if there's no wisdom, there's no fear, so wisdom comes first. So which one comes first? So the Chassidus explains there are two types of fear, two levels of fear. There's a basic fear, awe. A basic awe a person has to have that allows him to study Torah, that convinces him to study Torah, that pushes him to study Torah. And then there's a much deeper awe that is created through Torah study. Without a basic level of awe, there's nothing pushing you to study Torah. If you don't recognize, if you don't realize at a basic level that Torah is the word of God, and when you study Torah, you become one with God, what's motivating you to study Torah? So you need that basic level of awe. But then when you study Torah, you reach a level of awe that ideally will scare you from studying Torah ever again. Because, right, it'll create such an awe that you'll see God in the study of Torah, but right? So if you have the greater level of awe before you study Torah, you're going to be too scared to touch the Torah. But the Torah brings out the greater level of awe.
So like an entry level, and then once you get into the study of the Torah, that elevates
Exactly.
to the second level.
Right.
That makes sense.
But even someone who can't reach this level should still study Torah.
I mean, that's a goal.
Because you'll reach that eventually.
Right, that's your goal.
Okay, let's look here, page 317. From this explanation of the lofty stature of Torah study, the wise man will be able to draw upon himself a sense of great awe as he engages in the study of the Torah. When he considers how his soul and its garments of thought and speech that are found in his brain and mouth are truly fused in perfect unity, with the divine will and the infinite light of the Ein Sof that is manifest in them. In other words, in the soul and its garments. When he studies Torah, this infinite light manifests in one's Torah study is of such a lofty level that all the upper and lower worlds are truly as naught in comparison with it, and are in fact as absolutely nothing at all. So much so that they can only bear to have a minute glow of it clothed in them without their reverting to nothingness altogether. Yeah, without them being consumed in this great light. Their main life force, which they receive from it, however, is not clothed within them. Mimale, it doesn't fill them from inside, but animates them from the outside, so to speak, in a transcendent, encompassing manner. Because if it would go inside of them, they would burst at the seams. This is the meaning of the verse. So this is what happens when you're studying Torah. What all the upper worlds can handle, you're handling when you're studying Torah. Even if you're not aware of it, you're accomplishing it. You're fused with God, with Sovev Kol Amin, with such a fusion that none of the spiritual worlds can handle such a fusion. This is the meaning of the verse. And God commanded us to fulfill all these statutes in order to fear God. In other words, that this creates an awe of God. Regarding this great fear, our sages said, if there's no wisdom, there's no fear. In other words, this is the second fear. In this context, wisdom represents Torah study, and fear the higher level of the awe of God, which can be reached only by way of the Torah. By contrast, the previous statement, that if there's no fear, there is no wisdom, refers to the lower level of fear, which is a prerequisite for Torah study, as stated above. In relation to this level of fear, in other words, the greater awe that's a result of Torah study, the Torah calls it a gateway to the dwelling. In other words, the sole means of entering the dwelling. In other words, the higher level of fear, as is explained elsewhere, is through Torah study. So again, when you're faced with a dilemma, should I study Torah now or do something else? We have to remind ourselves, what am I accomplishing through Torah study? Through Torah study, I'm entering a gate that is impossible for any other creation, however spiritual it is, to enter. Am I going to give up that opportunity? Not every mind, however, can sustain such a fear. Yet even he whose mind cannot bear such a fear, nor even a minute part of it, because the root and source of his soul derives from an inferior level. In other words, the lower gradations of the 10 Sefirot of the world of Asiya, even he should not be deterred from the actual performance of the Torah and the mitzvahs for want of this fear, as will be explained further. In other words, later we'll explain how a person can ultimately reach this fear, this awe. So even if in the moment you don't feel capable of attaining this fear, that shouldn't stop you from trying to get it and trying to attain it, because ultimately it is possible. This is all, it's like the guy who was chopped wood for a living, and after a while he started becoming less productive because his axe was getting dull. So someone suggested to him, why don't you sharpen your axe? You'll be able to chop more wood. He says, I'm so busy because the axe isn't, I'm so busy, I don't have time to sharpen the axe. In other words, we get lost sometimes in the things we think we need to do, not realizing that if we took the time to focus on things we really need to do, not only would we end up in a much greater place, all those things we think we need to do would be accomplished as well. Sometimes people think in order to do a mitzvah, in order to do something positive, I need to bend the rules here or there. Yeah, I need to, I don't know. In order to get more people to come to a shul, we have to bend the rules. You have to take down the mechitza. You have to bend the rules and do things. In order to grow, you have to sort of start off by diminishing things. That's a classic example. not realizing that if you sharpen the knife, instead of focusing on the mechitza, focus on the Torah, focus on the things that people come for, focus on the things that talk to the neshama, to the soul, and then a little slice of the axe, and the person's sold. All right, we'll continue with chapter 24 next week, I believe. What do we have? We have, I'm just trying to see how many, because